The latest UN Security Council meeting ends without a concrete conclusion on North Korea's recent ICBM test, but the international community remains critical, centered on South Korea along with 9 UNSC members. South Korea's ruling and opposition parties end a long tussle over the 2024 budget and agreed to sign a deal. More funds will be allocated for the nation's R&D projects. Amid mounting pressure, Israel is ready to offer a one-week pause of its fighting in Gaza as part of a new deal to have more hostages freed by Hamas. It's December 20th, 2023. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin with joint condemnation by South Korea and 9 UNSC members on North Korea's latest ICBM launch. They urged Pyongyang to abandon its unlawful missile programs. In the meantime, the latest UN Security Council meeting ended up empty-handed amid opposition from China and Russia. Choi Min-jung starts us off.
The international community has once again condemned North Korea for its recent test firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile. South Korea and 9 member countries of the UN Security Council, including the U.S., released a joint statement on Tuesday to strongly call on the North to abandon its unlawful missile programs. The statement highlighted that the regime has violated the UNSC resolutions over 30 times this year alone, as it fired 5 ICBMs, over 25 other ballistic missiles, plus 3 satellite launches using ballistic missile technology. A UNSC meeting was also convened the same day where officials strongly criticized Pyongyang's escalating threats.
We have used every word to describe the DPRK's continued threats to international peace and security. Flagrant, unacceptable, reckless, egregious. All of these words still apply. But today, I offer another word: ridiculous.
Once again, this irresponsible launch endangered vessels, exposed aircraft in the surrounding area to great risk, and terrified Japanese citizens.
North Korea, however, attempted to shift the blame to South Korea and the U.S., claiming a legitimate right to self-defense.
The ICBM launch conducted by DPRK this time is a warning countermeasure in the face of the grave situation.
Tuesday's UNSC meeting, however, concluded without a concrete outcome amid opposition from China and Russia. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea and Japan will resume their high-level economic talks tomorrow here in Seoul, which have not been held for 8 years due to strained relations. Their talks could include key supply chain issues. Bae Eun-ji brings us what to expect.
For the first time in 8 years, the foreign ministries of South Korea and Japan have decided to resume high-level economic talks. The talks will take place in Seoul on Thursday, led by South Korea's Deputy Foreign Minister for Economic Affairs, Kang Jae-kwon, and Japan's Senior Deputy Foreign Minister, Keiichi Ono. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Wednesday that the two sides will assess their bilateral economic cooperation and discuss issues of mutual concern, including cooperation in economic security policies and regional and multilateral cooperation. The two sides are likely to discuss issues on economic security such as supply chain and technology cooperation. Eyes are on whether the issue of South Korea's import ban on Japanese seafood originating from Fukushima or Korean wartime forced labor victims' lawsuit filed against Japanese companies will be on the agenda. This is the 15th time that the two countries are holding the economic dialogue after it was first launched in 1999 to discuss comprehensive economic cooperation. It was last held in January 2016 in Tokyo. In late 2016, the Japanese government postponed the meeting when a statue of a girl symbolizing Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery was built in front of the Japanese consulate in South Korea's port city of Busan. And the meeting remained suspended as bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo worsened over several issues stemming from Japan's colonial rule of Korea before and during World War II. Then in March this year, bilateral relations started to improve after South Korea announced a plan to compensate victims of Japan's wartime forced labor to resolve the issue following decades of disputes. The leaders of the two countries met in July and agreed to resume the high-level economic dialogue by the end of this year. The foreign ministry expressed hopes of further improvements in bilateral relations, saying the upcoming talks could become an opportunity for the two countries to move toward a future-oriented relationship. 배은지, Arirang News.
Over at the National Assembly, the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party Lawmakers have finally reached an agreement on next year's budget. More funds will be allocated for the nation's R&D projects, which have been one of contending issues. Kim Jong-sil has the details.
The Budget Committee, consisting of two lawmakers, each from the ruling PPP and main opposition DP, finally reached a deal. More than 3 weeks past the legal deadline for next year's budget to be rubber-stamped, the lawmakers, joined by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, smiled and held hands.
We reached an agreement today with a bit of give and take with each other because we couldn't delay any longer when taking people's livelihoods and the country's economy into consideration.
Of course, some of the agreement falls short of our expectations, but I think it's meaningful that both parties reached an agreement based on the best possible negotiations.
The government has accepted budget restorations or increases in key fields proposed by the DP. For R&D, there is a net increase of 600 billion won, or about $460 million. The amount is less than half of what DP had asked for, but is considered a huge gain as the government originally proposed a cutback of 5.2 trillion won, or about $4 billion. For the Saemangam Regional Development Project, which the government originally considered cutting back on, there's an agreed increase of 300 billion won, or about $230 million. Saemangam is one of South Korea's large-scale reclamation projects. There were high expectations to use the reclaimed land for renewable energy, such as wind power plants or solar power panels. The total budget cut the government proposed for local vouchers was also increased marginally by 300 billion Korean won. The vouchers allow local residents to purchase vouchers to use instead of a credit card or cash, with a discount rate varying from around 5 to 10%. Both parties have been racing to reach a deal after they launched a budget committee earlier this month. The agreed bill will be put to a vote on Thursday morning at the regular plenary session. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Korea ranked in an annual average of $15 billion in weapons exports over the past 2 years. According to Seoul's Defense Ministry on this Wednesday, the country's arms sales this year amount to just below $14 billion, while last year, Korea secured a record $17.3 billion. Regardless of the retreat in arms exports this year, Korea saw its export markets expand in 2023 to 12 nations from 4. There has also been more diversity in terms of the types of weapons exported, from 6 in 2022 to 12 this year. Aside from profits, the ministry believes greater weapons exports will bolster the military's logistics capabilities by securing more overseas production bases. The number of South Koreans who took parental, maternity, and paternity leave in 2022 increased by its largest margin in 11 years. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the figure jumped 14.2% year-on-year to around 200,000 workers. This was due to new policies implemented last year that support those on parental leave and decreases in telecommuting after COVID measures were lifted. The number of men taking paternity leave also rose by around 28% on-year to over 50,000, the largest since 2010 when data was first compiled. Amid mounting pressure, Israel could offer another ceasefire in its war with Hamas in Gaza in exchange for the release of more hostages held by the Palestinian militant group. Chung Eun-ju has latest.
Israel has issued a proposal to Hamas that includes a week-long pause in fighting in exchange for the release of 40 hostages. First reported by Axios, the proposal looks to release hostages that include women, the elderly, and those in need of urgent care. CNN reported that the deal is being presented to Hamas through Qatari mediators. Speaking to a gathering of ambassadors on Tuesday, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and additional humanitarian aid in order to enable the release of hostages. The previous 7-day temporary ceasefire last month led to the release of 86 women and children held by Hamas in exchange for 240 Palestinian women and teenagers held in Israeli jails. Hamas also released 24 foreign nationals during that period. Meanwhile, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is expected to visit Egypt on Wednesday to hold ceasefire talks, raising hopes of another temporary pause to fighting in Gaza. A senior Hamas official also said on Monday that it rejected holding negotiations over exchanging prisoners while the war was ongoing, but was open to any initiative to end the war. The Israeli military's continuing airstrikes and ground offensives in Gaza have resulted in thousands of civilian deaths. And that has led to growing international condemnation, including from traditional allies. The United States has also called on Israel to scale back its attacks to target only Hamas. As diplomatic efforts continue, the humanitarian crisis in the besieged Strip worsens with each day. Nearly 20,000 people have been killed by Israeli military action in Gaza since October 7th, and more than 52,000 wounded, according to the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health. Much of northern Gaza has been decimated by airstrikes and, according to the United Nations, almost 1.9 million people, more than 80% of the enclave's population, have been displaced. 정은주, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Russia's Vladimir Putin has pledged to maintain his military offensive against Ukraine in the new year. Yoon-jin covers his comments.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke at a defense leadership meeting in Moscow on Tuesday, during which he stressed that Russia will not give up what he called its territory, adding that Moscow will not abandon the goals of its special military operation.
The West is not abandoning its strategy of containing Russia and its aggressive goals in Ukraine. Well, we are not going to give up our goals for a special military operation.
He said Russia had taken on 490,000 contract and voluntary soldiers in 2023, adding that next year, Russia will try to boost those forces to 745,000 men. During his meeting with the Defense Ministry, Putin said if Western countries or Ukraine want to hold talks with Russia, he's ready to do so, but it would be on Russia's terms.
History will put everything in its place. We won't interfere, but we won't give up our territory. This is what everyone in Ukraine, Europe and the USA, everyone who is aggressive towards Russia should understand. If they want to negotiate, let them negotiate. We will only do it based on our interests.
Putin also reiterated that Ukraine's accession to NATO, even if it's 10 or 15 years from now, is unacceptable. Meanwhile, at an end-of-year news conference on Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he was confident his country would continue to receive important financial support from the US and the EU.
As for financial assistance, we are working very hard on it. I am sure that the United States of America will not betray us, and that what we have achieved with the United States will be fulfilled.
He added that no one knows when the war in Ukraine will end, but the moment could be brought closer if everything necessary for victory is done. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, and in 2022 claimed the 4 additional regions of Ukraine that its troops partially control are part of Russia. Kyiv says it will not rest until every last Russian soldier is ejected from Ukraine. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Iceland's Reykjanes Peninsula exploded in volcanic eruptions Monday night, its 4th in fewer than 3 years. An Song-jin reports.
A volcano in the southwestern part of Iceland erupted on Monday evening. The eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula released bursts of glowing lava onto the landscape and huge plumes of smoke more than 100 meters into the sky. This comes after weeks of seismic activity since the underground magma chamber formed in November.
Did the eruption come as a surprise? Yes and no is the answer. So yes, because we did not expect it will start tonight. Yeah. No, because we have seen precursors since many weeks, actually since October.
This prompted an evacuation order for the nearby town of Grindavik with slightly over 3,000 residents. The Icelandic government has said the eruption does not pose a threat to life, but has warned people to stay out of the area as gas emitted from it can be dangerous. Nearby roads are closed to all traffic except emergency teams. However, international flight corridors remain open, though some flight schedules to and from Iceland were delayed. Though hundreds of cubic meters of lava were being released every second in the first 2 hours of the eruption, the intensity soon diminished by early Tuesday with lava spreading laterally. An expert provided an insight on how long this eruption would last.
It is impossible right now to establish how long it is going to be the eruption. But comparing with the previous history of Icelandic eruption, realistically, it's going to last no more than a few months.
Iceland sits on a tectonic plate boundary which makes it a volcanic hotspot in the North Atlantic. It is home to 32 active volcanoes. The most disruptive in recent times was a 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull volcano, which led to huge ash clouds from glacial ice that led to widespread airspace closures over Europe and the Atlantic. Experts say that this most recent volcanic eruption won't cause the same level of chaos as seen in 2010. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
North Korea's economy shrank for the third consecutive year in 2022, widening the gap behind South Korea. Data from Statistics Korea show that the North's GDP stood at a little over 36 trillion won, or some $28 billion, which is 1/60th that of South Korea. This was mostly due to a decrease in manufacturing and agricultural production. Meanwhile, Pyongyang's gross national income saw a year-on-year increase of 0.5% to 1.43 million won, 1/30th of Seoul's GNI. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice. On this occasion, a special exhibition close to DMZ acknowledges the current circumstances while sharing a hopeful vision for reunification. He brings more.
The Odusan Unification Tower stands just a few miles between the military demarcation line between South and North Korea. Here, a special exhibition is being held to mark the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice. Called Division the Vision, and under the theme, The Vision of Unity, it's a collaboration between Gallery Pagyong and the National Institute for Unification Education.
The artists in this exhibition all live or work near the border. Living so close to North Korea, each artist reflected the unfortunate reality of being unable to visit. Including myself, it's not easy to remember the reality of division and express our longing for peace in our everyday lives. But I hope this exhibition can inform people about the realities of our division and convey hope of unification in the future.
The exhibition presents a special collection of artworks by 6 artists: Lee Dong-chun, Kim Si-hyun, Kim Won-gun, Bae Soo-young, Oh Jae-woo, and Chun So-young. They portrayed the current state of the divided Korean peninsula from their perspectives through various mediums such as paintings, sculptures, photography, installations, and videos. Artist Bae Soo-young presents Peaceful Melody Garden, seeking to establish a connection that goes beyond the physical boundaries of the demilitarized zone.
During the Korean War, the DMZ was a fiercely contested area. Countless landmines and explosives remain buried in the ground here. Ironically, these metal remnants coexist with wildlife and plants as the area has been preserved and untouched by human interference. The aim was to fill the space with a peaceful melody symbolizing our collective hope to overcome the challenges we face and embrace a brighter world. I wish for these hopes to spread and to console the souls who have lost family members due to the division. Below, there are warhead containers used to store missiles. They represent the past, present, and the future in their true essence.
The exhibition also hopes to dispel long-held biases and misunderstandings that have built up between North and South Korea. Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
K-pop sensation BTS will be sharing insights into their 10-year journey to becoming global superstars in a new 8-part docuseries. The group's agency Big Hit Music says 2 episodes of the group's documentary, BTS Monuments, Beyond the Star, will drop every Wednesday starting today until January 10th on Disney+. The The new docuseries will delve into key moments in the group's career, such as when BTS was formed, its huge global success, and the members' solo projects. Fans will also be able to watch never-before-seen interviews and behind-the-scenes moments with all 7 members talking about both their personal and professional lives. As of 2019, Korea has in operation a special team of experts assigned with the task of thwarting technology theft. Song Yoo-jin covers their contributions.
Advanced semiconductor technology was about to be leaked to China. 3 domestic companies were involved, and even the smallest among them could have suffered losses exceeding 100 billion won, or roughly $75.8 million. Damages could have escalated exponentially if the crime had gone unnoticed, as company employees were involved.
Pictures were taken using a mobile phone, and presentation materials were created and delivered to Chinese companies.
The agency that prevented the theft was the Korean Intellectual Property Office's Technology and Design Police Division. Formed in March 2019, the division is comprised of examiners who worked in patent examination at the KIPO. With diverse experts, including doctorates, lawyers, and forensic specialists, and by incorporating police investigative techniques, it can prevent significant crimes.
We accurately determine which technology has been infringed. Then we employ police investigative techniques starting from covert operations, suspect interrogations, informant interviews, on-site inspections.
As the effectiveness of the technology police in detecting theft increases, related support is also expanding. Penalties for technology theft, often considered lenient, are being strengthened. An industrial property dispute resolution support center will be established to mediate disputes between companies and, if necessary, involve the KIPO division. With the establishment of the Joint Response Team for Technology Leakage, there are plans to also actively respond to international disputes.
With global technological competition intensifying, stealing technology is much faster than developing it. That's why international issues of technology theft are widely discussed.
In the past 5 years, 93 cases of industrial technology leakage overseas have caused estimated damage of 25 trillion Korean won, or roughly $18.9 billion. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
As the second Arctic cold spell heads south, the sub-zero cold continues even in the middle of the day. Tomorrow morning temperatures in Seoul will plunge to minus 15 degrees Celsius, bringing the strongest cold wave this winter. Please prepare thoroughly. With freezing cold temperatures, heavy snow alerts have been issued on West Coast, Jeju Island, Ulleungdo Island, and Dokdo Island. The expected amount of snow for the day after tomorrow will be more than 70 centimeters in mountainous areas of Jeju Island and more than 50 in western parts of the Jeollado provinces. The west coast areas of Chungcheongnam-do province will also receive more than 20 centimeters. Snow on the west coast will continue until the day after tomorrow, and Jeju Island is expected to have snow until the weekend. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at minus 15 degrees, the coldest morning of this winter. Highs in Seoul will jump to minus 7, Gwangju and Gyeongju minus 3 degrees. This cold spell will ease from the weekend ahead of Christmas Day. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the day.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
Children's laughter, hope, dream. K-animation belongs in them. Interesting and valuable story that transcends between everyday life and dream. Surprising spectacle where imagination becomes real. An array of subjects catering from infants to adolescents. For our story to reach all corners of the world. K-animation makes healthy laughter for children.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Good Morning Seoul.
And we're broadcasting to you live from Seoul, South Korea. This is where you can get
interactive radio that you can watch and listen to. Enjoy Radio Clock with me.
Connecting Korea and the world, Arirang Radio. It's our 20th anniversary of our station. For you, wherever you may be, and for 20 years like a friend, as a messenger, and as a partner. We have shared countless happy memories, and this might just be another beginning. As you've done for the past 20 years, and for the next 20 to come, join us on Arirang Radio. Always Korea, always Arirang Radio.
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President Seol
South Korea's economy will grow.
The central bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged.
Mission complete for rocket booty South Korea.
Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the World Expo 2030.
Arirang. Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea fired its fifth ICBM of this year on Monday, just several hours after it launched an SRBM on Sunday night. The regime confirmed as much the day after by saying that it test-fired a Hwasong-18 solid-fuel ICBM. The missile launch came as Seoul and Washington decided to complete their nuclear cooperation guidelines by the middle of next year through the second session of the Nuclear Consultative Group meeting. Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo also strengthened ties even more by launching a real-time information sharing system on North Korean missile launches. How did experts see North Korea's recent missile launches, and how did they forecast tensions on the peninsula to develop next year? For this, we have invited Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a senior fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, into the studio. Dr. Go, welcome.
Good to be back.
And we also have Professor Brian Myers from Dongsa University. Good to have you with us, Professor Myers.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first question to our Professor Myers. North Korea fired an ICBM on Monday, just hours after it fired a short-range missile on Sunday night. Before we talk about the ICBM, what could be the reason behind two consecutive launches?
Well, as you know, North Korea has a habit of launching short-range missiles as a response to American or South Korean statements of a hardline nature. And I think that was the case here, because you had that nuclear consultative group meeting, which you just mentioned, which talked about incorporating nuclear scenarios into exercises. And then you had the USS Missouri docking here in Busan. So I think the short-range missile launch was a kind of a defiant answer to those things. Whereas I assume that the ICBM launch, the Hwasong-18 launch, had been planned in advance according to the dictates of a longer-term timetable. So the missiles ended up being launched in quite rapid succession, but I wouldn't read too much into that. And, you know, in any case, we can really only speculate about why the North launches at one time and not another.
All right, thank you for your explanation, Professor Myers. Now, Dr. Go, now I'd like to ask more about the capability of the solid fuel ICBM, the Hwasong-18. So as far as I know, this latest ICBM launch was fired at a lofted angle, but if it was fired upright, the U.S. territory would be within its reach, right?
No, exactly. So, I mean, we know the capabilities and performance metrics of the Hwasong-18. It's the third time that it's carrying out this launch. It was first tested earlier this year. But then I think what North Koreans are trying to do this time, in fact, they explained the purpose of this launch. They said this is the first launch after the Hwasong-18 has been operationally deployed. So according to the North Korean sources, Hwasong-18 is no longer under development. It's, in fact, the development process has been completed. Now it's in fact deployed operationally. So they wanted to see the actual capability of Hwasong-18 under an exercise scenario. And but then in terms of hard performance metrics, it's not different from what we have seen before. So this time around, the Hwasong-18 launched at the right angle, reached the altitude of 600 kilometers or so, which is similar to the height that it reached in the previous times. And then it flew over like 1,000 kilometers for a total duration of 4,000 seconds, which is more or less like 70 minutes. So. So from these metrics, you can infer that the complete maximum range of Hwasong-18 would be between 13,000 to 15,000 kilometers, which would place the entirety of the continental United States within the range of this particular missile. So in that sense, I think Hwasong-18 is continue. I mean, we think it will continue to be developed, but then the North Koreans are claiming that the development has been completed. But then I think regardless, we know how threatening the weapon system is, especially because because it is a Hwasong 8 ICBM with a solid fuel rocket engine, which really shortens the preparatory time for the launch and it reduces the window opportunity for the alliance to target the ICBM before it actually goes up in the air. So in that sense, I think the threat profile, regardless of what the North Koreans are claiming, remains the same.
All right, I see. Now, like I said before, this ICBM launch came hours after the SRBM launch. And Professor Myers, there are many speculations about this. And some say the missile was actually led by Russia, applying its own new technology for war. What's your view on this?
You know, I really think it's more reasonable to assume that this was just a North Korean response to the NCG meeting and the USS Missouri coming to Busan, because I don't see why the North Koreans would need to rely on Russia to lead this type of missile launch that they've had little problem carrying out on their own over the past few years. And I don't see why the Russians would want to engage in that particular sort of cooperation either. You know, close relations between Moscow and Pyongyang are a cause of concern from the alliance's standpoint. And Russia seems to be taking Pyongyang's side in the UN Security Council. But just because Putin and Kim are on very good terms does not mean that we must now assume that Russia is involved in every missile the North Koreans launch. I think speculating in that direction without firm evidence carries a danger of raising tensions, and they're high enough already.
Right, I see. So there's no reason for North Korea to depend on Russia when it comes to launching SRBM. All right. Now, Dr. Go, two reasons behind such back-to-back missile launches. Our Professor Myers already mentioned the NCG meeting. It was actually the second session of the meeting, and there they agreed to complete the guidelines of the planning and operating the shared nuclear strategy. Could you tell us more about this?
So, the principal deputy national security advisor Kim Tae-yo explained that as a result of the second session of the NCG meeting, South Korea has been able to increase its so-called nuclear IQ. So what it means is that South Korea has picked up important know-hows about how to incorporate the nuclear warfare scenario in case of contingency, as well as understanding how the United States is going to use nuclear weapons in case of in case of conflict in the Korean Peninsula. So in that sense, I think it really reflects something that the South Korean side has been asking the United States to provide for a long time. And so I think this really makes the South Korean preparation against North Korean nuclear threats much more credible. And this is very important. It's all about deterrence. So by demonstrating to the North Koreans that we understand how to use nuclear weapons in an operational scenario, that means that we know how to respond to potential use of nuclear weapons by North Korea. And thirdly, that means that we know how to respond jointly against the North Korea's nuclear threat. So it really increases the price or like the deterrence cost on the part of North Korea. So it has a deterrence value. And then more operationally, I think the Deputy Advisor, National Security Advisor Kim Tae-yo also remarked that the South Korea and the United States are going to have conventional nuclear integration, and also as deploying so-called combined nuclear weapons. I think what he really meant is not so much a weapon, but a combined nuclear response. So what it means is that it's not like the South Korea and the United States are going to jointly develop a new nuclear weapon. That's not the case. United States is not developing any new nuclear weapon system. They're modernizing the existing ones. So in that sense, I think what it means is that the South Korea and the United States are going to have a joint know-how and going to coordinate closely when it comes to the use of U.S. nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. So which is a hypothetical scenario anyways. And again, we need to make it very sure that ultimately the decision to use nuclear weapons lies solely with the President of the United States. So in that sense, I think what it really meant is that there's a very complex and a realistic operational plan now in place to respond to North Korea's use of nuclear weapons in case of a conflict. So I think, again, this is all about raising the deterrence against North Korea. And in that sense, I think the North Koreans are going to feel the pain. And then because they're going to make them spend more time and effort to prepare to a scenario where the South Korea and the United States have a full preparation, full capability to respond to their threats.
All right, I see. Now, adding on to what our Dr. Go said, Professor Myers, Seoul and Washington also agreed to incorporate nuclear operation scenarios in next year's Allied military exercises for the first time. Could you tell us what this is about?
Yeah, in broad brushstrokes, yeah, even nuclear operations need to be carried out in coordination with conventional forces, conventional assets, because they need to provide support and security for the nuclear operations. And the Americans and South Koreans haven't rehearsed that kind of coordination before, because the plan was always for America to handle the nuclear side of its things completely on its own. And since the Washington Declaration from last April, the plan, according to Kim Tae-hyo as well, is for the two allies to prepare and execute together. So naturally, that means incorporating nuclear scenarios into joint exercises, of which there are going to be many different types of scenario. And I think this will be largely a matter of tabletop exercises, computer simulations, that kind of thing, for obvious reasons. But even so, if these joint exercises do incorporate a nuclear dimension, I think we're going to see the North Koreans protesting especially loudly in the run-up to the exercises. So a sharp increase in tension is something the two allies are going to have to be prepared for.
All right. Now, as our Dr. Go already mentioned, all of these details regarding NCG were actually shared by Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo. And he said that South Korea will coordinate bilateral and trilateral measures with the United States and Japan if North Korea continues to engage in provocations. But what could those measures be?
So I think the overarching, I'll say like a theme here, as the National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo mentioned, is as Professor Maya said, is adding the nuclear dimension to the operational plans. So what we have discussed so far in the context of the nuclear consultative group was to add the nuclear dimension to the joint operational plan between South Korea and the United States. So now let's expand this to other areas and other countries and other actors. So therein comes Japan. So again, the Korean Peninsula Theater is actually pretty small. We're talking about a very small geographic dimension here. But then the North Korea's nuclear capability ranges from short range to all the way to the intercontinental range encompassing the continental United States. So Japan is in fact would say within the range of a short to medium range ballistic missiles by the North Koreans. So it's only natural for the Japanese to have some sort of understanding, a shared common understanding with South Korea and the United States in case of a contingency with North Korea. Again, we know that the UNSC here, the support framework to support the US and the South Korean forces in case of contingency, is based in Japan. So Japan is an integral part of any operational plan that involves North Korea. So in that sense, it's only natural for this nuclear discussion to include Japan. So when it comes to the operational implementation of such discussions, again, there's one peculiarity about the Japanese participation. Japan, in contrast to the South Koreans, the public in Japan are pretty opposed to the idea of use of nuclear weapons by any means, offensively or defensively. So in that sense, I think the Japanese public are going to be sensitive about all this nuclear topic that's being discussed right now between Seoul and Washington. So I think the government in Japan will probably ask to play up the non-nuclear dimension of the joint operational plan, and that's going to be the missile defense. So we know that the three countries, Japan, Korea, and the United States, have already carried out joint military exercises that involves missile defense, for instance, real-time information sharing, which is required to shut down any incoming projectile coming from North Korea, as well as they had a space-based exercise. So all this implies that the Japanese are going to be in charge of detecting and following any kind of North Korean missile launches, and possibly, I think we're probably, I don't think it's been disclosed, but I'm definitely sure that the three sides are discussing how to shut down possibly the North Korean ICBM if such an ICBM flies over the Japanese sky. So yeah, I think that's probably those are the measures that are going to be discussed in the future.
Then quite briefly, Dr. Go, do you see any possibility of Japan being involved in the NCG group as well?
I don't think so. Not for NCG per se, because NCG is all about nuclear use, and that's something that the Japanese side is allergic to. But I think the missile defense system is, again, it's a part of the complete deterrence against North Korean threat, and that's something that the Japanese side is very much interested in. So it's only natural for them to discuss this aspect of nuclear deterrence against North Korea.
All right, I see. Now, Professor Myers, as a matter of fact, the three countries began to operate a system for the real-time sharing of North Korean ballistic missile warning data. Now, how would the three countries be able to deal with North Korea's provocations even more?
Yeah, well, sharing information would mean quicker confirmation of a launch and its trajectory. It would perhaps eliminate uncertainty and confusion by providing sort of mutually confirming perspectives on a certain launch. And that could give the allies extra seconds, even minutes, in the case of some allies, to activate defense systems, evacuate civilians, and so on. And when every second counts, that's a significant help. On the other hand, our expectations need to be realistic because, as Dr. Go says, the peninsula is a small theater. Seoul is virtually on the DMZ, and the North Koreans now have solid fuel technology, which will allow them to launch missiles much more quickly than before. So real-time sharing would certainly be a plus, but it's no reason for the allies, and especially the South Koreans, to think that it greatly enhances their security against an ICBM attack.
All right, I see your point. Now, Seoul and Washington bolstering nuclear cooperation is, of course, like our Professor Myers says, one of the reasons behind North Korea's provocations. But Dr. Go, Sunday, as we all know, marked the 12th anniversary of the death of former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, and that could also be one of the reasons. Now, 12 years on from Kim Jong-un taking office, how would you say their styles differ from each other?
Well, we know that Kim Jong-un came to power trying to portray himself as a new leader of North Korea with a much younger style, much more, I would say, open or international, we'll even say. He, in fact, touted that he had grown up outside of North Korea, that he had grown in Europe, and somehow he wanted to transplant some of that fashion into the North Korean society proper. And so that was at least the first 10 years of his reign. So he tried to, I think, aspire to modernize the country much more so than his father ever tried to. So in that sense, you can say that each of the North Korean leader reflected their own age, so to speak. So Kim Jong-il was also young one day, but then eventually when he assumed power, he's already old. So he became very conservative. I mean, he tried to continue with his own father's governing style, so to speak. Not completely the same, but in a sense, I think Kim Jong-il saw himself as more of a guardian of the North Korean values and principles, whereas Kim Jong-un is different in the sense that he wants to reform them. At least that was the style or image that he tried to project himself. That's why he tried to be portray himself as a leader of the people, and then that's the reason why he's more open and more it's being seen more with the public more often, and also he cries in front of cameras.
Right.
I think these are all like conservative efforts to portray himself as a man of the people, and that was never the case with his own father, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il was known as the more of a hermit kind of a leader, whereas Kim Jong-un is much more open. But I think there's another key difference here. I think Kim Jong-il was more of a strategist than Kim Jong-un was. I think Kim Jong-un is, in a sense, has only one trick up his sleeve, which is the nuclear development. Whereas Kim Jong-il, was leader of North Korea at a much tougher time. It was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to the complete cut off of the assistance coming from the Eastern Bloc, and also the country underwent economic crisis and social crisis. So in that sense, I think, but Kim Jong-il was able to somehow preserve the regime and pull the country out of this crisis and somehow pave the way for the succession, which is Kim Jong-un's leadership. So in that sense, I think Kim Jong-il was much more deliberate and a careful strategist than Kim Jong-un is right now. So the other key difference is that Kim Jong-il happened to be more patient. I think Kim Jong-un is very impatient despite his young age. He has plenty of time ahead, but then I think he tries to achieve a lot of things in a very short span of time. And that led to the failure of the Hanoi talks in 2019. And who knows, maybe the current course of a nuclear development may eventually fail because he's putting too many eggs in one basket, which is a nuclear development.
All right, interesting. Thank you for the comparison, Dr. Go. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask this question to our Professor Myers. With North Korea firing missiles and Russia, North Korea, and China aligning more than ever before, the tension on the peninsula is definitely growing. How do you forecast it to be in 2024?
Well, it's a tough call because there are so many variables. I think primarily the war in Ukraine is a variable, but it's worth pointing out, I want to sort of strike a positive balance. It's worth pointing out that we haven't seen a North Korean assault on Allied forces since the mine incident in 2015 that maimed those 2 South Korean soldiers. So, of course, North Korea continues to violate UN and US sanctions by launching missiles. But if those launches are provocations, I think they're relatively consistent and predictable provocations. They're almost routine at this point. We've had dozens of such sanctions violations this year. So my point is that while North Korea refuses to obey UN resolutions, the legitimacy of which it refuses to recognize, I think it's otherwise trying to project the appearance of a country that can be trusted with a nuclear capability. Now, we can question that pose, of course, but still, I would be surprised if North Korea goes beyond missile launches and engages in provocations against the South Korean military, which, as I say, we saw quite a few of up to 2015. So I expect, a steady increase in tension as a result of the nuclear program, but I don't expect any big, deadly provocations.
All right, I see your point, Professor Myers. Now, quite briefly, Dr. Go, I'd like to ask your opinion as well.
So I think, I pretty much agree with Professor Myers when it comes to localized provocations. I think the North Koreans are going to stick to the major provocation or strategic provocations that involve strategic weapons. My concern is that North Korea might finally carry out the much anticipated and delayed 7th nuclear test. I think the North Koreans are they're probably concerned that they have concern about the Chinese behavior. I think they've been relying on this idea that there's a new Cold War developing in the region. There's a clear blocks forming. South Korea, Japan, United States on one hand, and then on the other hand, there's North Korea, China, and Russia. But then we see in the recent meeting between Xi Jinping and then U.S. President Joe Biden that in San Francisco in November, there's this tendency on the part of the Chinese government to stabilize the relationship with the United States and also reach out to Korea and Japan. So in that sense, I think it really goes against the North Korean aspiration to be an integral part of this bloc, a new Cold War bloc. And that might tempt the North Koreans to provoke the fault line that exists underneath the geopolitical environment here, which is the fact that China can never abandon North Korea. So maybe North Korea will going to essentially dare the Chinese to abandon them by carrying out a major red line provocation, such as a nuclear test, essentially challenging the North Korea Chinese to say, sanction us if you want to. So I think that's the fear that the concern that I have for next year.
All right. Well, thank you for your projection, Dr. Go. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go, as always.
Always my pleasure.
And thank you, Professor Myers, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, too.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.